Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Daily Creative Challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Thursday afternoon. We've almost made it through the week. Hope you're excited for another challenge. We'll be wrapping things up tomorrow with challenge number 5, but before we get to that, we have a brand new challenge ready for you today. And today, we're gonna be diving into 3D transforms, which is a really cool feature in Adobe XD that'll allow you to give a little bit of depth to some of your designs. And I think you're gonna have a lot of fun with this. And what I found specifically with this feature is once you start exploring it and experimenting and figuring out how it works, it just opens up a whole new realm of possibilities, what you can do with your designs. So definitely head on over to behance.net/challenge/XD. And you can find all the information about our daily challenges right over here. If you want to get notified when new challenges are released, definitely hit that big blue button right at the top. Every single day during this week, you're going to receive a challenge. You can join us in our community chat on Discord. We have an amazing group of people over on Discord who watch our shows daily, not just challenges, but also amazing things from After Effects to Photoshop and Illustrator, all sorts of fun stuff. And then finally, you can share your work either on Discord, on Behance. That's the one I was looking for. My mind just went, boop, nothing. Anyways, scroll down. You can see what we've accomplished so far this week. We started off by building our own search engine. That was kind of fun. Is that what we did? No, we did not. What's going on here? I think we're jumping the gun a little bit. But anyways, this page looks a little bit different than I looked at just a second ago. Let me refresh it. Andrew's in the chat. Andrew, fix it. Let's see if it fixed it. No, it did not. Anyways, we tackled custom email templates on Monday, and then we moved on to animated interactive buttons. Yesterday, we designed a shopping widget. And today we're going to be working on a mobile wallet using 3D transforms. And just a little bit of a spoiler for tomorrow, we're going to be building a search engine. There we go, surprise. I don't know why that's there and at the beginning. And December, I don't know what's happening. But anyways, let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. This is the template for today. And if I zoom in here, challenge number 4, we're going to be using 3D transforms to create a mobile wallet that jumps off your screen. Very subtly though, we don't want to overdo it with these transformations because then it gets a little bit too obnoxious, right? Now, if you want some inspiration, right down here, I pulled some shots from Dribbble. I thought these were kind of cool. So you can definitely look at these, or you can go to Behance or Dribbble and search 3D wallet or wallet design or credit cards and things like that. You get lots of inspiration. And if you want to take things up to another level, right here at the top, I included a tip that links to one of my YouTube videos. So if you launch this preview and click on this button, it's going to take you to that video and you're going to learn how to create a card that looks something like this. And if we do have time, I will cover that in today's session. All right, so we've got our wallet. And Andrew is silent in the chat. He's probably scrambling to figure out what's going on with that landing page. But anyways, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start designing our wallet. We're gonna lay a few things out. And Chris says, December is arriving too soon. I know, right? So we're gonna lay things out just to kind of set how things are gonna look. And that'll allow us to kind of position our cards inside of this screen. Now I'm gonna start by changing the color of my artboard. I want it bit of a darker design for this one. So I'm going to shift this down a little bit and maybe go in this range right about here. Beautiful. All right. Now, next up, right at the top, we might want some text to kick off this screen so users know what they're looking at. So I'm going to grab the text tool, shortcut key T, and click, and we'll type out wallet. And I'll position it somewhere maybe about 24 pixels from the left to stick with that lovely 8-pixel grid, definitely keeping in mind that we have the notch or now the dynamic island up at the top of our iPhones. Of course, if you're designing for Android, some of them have notches and cutouts and pills and things like that. Definitely keep that in mind as well. And then over to the right, we might want a very simple button to maybe add an additional card, right? So we'll do something like that. We'll just add a little placeholder for now. We can always add a plus button a little bit later. All right, now for the card itself, we're going to start off with one card. We're going to turn it into a component so we can very easily update the rest of them as we need to. I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag one out across this artboard. There we go. So we have the base of our card ready to go. Now, Styling wise, we probably don't need a border, but we might want to round out the corners a little bit. Now, most credit cards have a relatively simple rounded radius, right? A corner radius, something like 8 pixels. Some of them are even a little bit less, maybe about 4. But depending on the style, considering many of these cards might be completely digital, you could potentially bump it up to about 16 if you really want to go for that fancier, curvier style, right? But I'm going to keep it relatively simple and stick with about 8. Now, for this first card, we're going to add a bit of a pop of color. So let's switch the fill over, and maybe we'll go for a nice bluish purple. Now, I talk a lot about colors in my masterclasses specifically, and you know, in a situation like this, you might want to add a nice, vibrant pop of color. But if you go something like this, right? This is very vibrant, right? And this might look great on a lighter screen like that, right? But when you're working with a darker experience, these very vibrant colors, they tend to almost vibrate a little bit, right? They get a bit muddy, they just look a little bit off. So I found that sometimes just kind of moving this over to the left to bring the saturation out just a touch, and then kind of dialing in the exact color you're looking for will just give a little bit more of a pleasing experience to your eyes, right? So we'll leave it right about there and we'll see what that looks like. We can always go back and make some changes. Now, on many of these digital credit cards, and especially, you know, physical credit cards as well, there's often a design or a pattern on it, but you want to be careful because you don't want it too crazy, because then you're not going to be able to see the text on top of it. So using something like, you know, a pattern that you might have licensed or downloaded or whatever, maybe you created it yourself, could look really interesting on a design like this. So I'm going to duplicate this shape, Command and Control D, boop, and then simply drag this on top. Now, if you are looking for patterns and you don't have any at your disposal, if you do go to stock.adobe.com, there is a completely free section you can dive into, and you can search for, there's my email address, don't email me. You can search for something like pattern or, you know, halftone or whatever it might be, and you can, you know, use and license all of these completely for free in your projects, which is wonderful, right? So if you don't have any, definitely hop over to Adobe Stock. Now, this pattern here, it looks okay, but it's definitely going to cause some problems. So I might want to maybe switch over the blend mode to soft light and maybe drop the opacity. Something, I don't know, maybe about 30%, just so it's nice and subtle. All right, so we have our card looking pretty good, but of course we want some text on top of it for things like the, you know, whatever the brand name is. We might want the card number, the card holder name, things like that. So maybe right in the middle, we're going to start with maybe the card number. So I'm going to click and just type out a bunch of random numbers. Maybe I'll put 2 spaces in between just to separate them a little bit. And it's usually in sets of 4, something like that, right? So we have a card number. Now, on many of these credit cards, you have a little bit more of a stylistic text to it. So instead of something like Astoria Sands, which we might use for some of the other information, we may want something like, I think it was, what was it called? Monarcha. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but Monarcha, right? So we'll do something like that, and it looks kind of interesting. I'm gonna make it a little bit larger. Definitely play around with the sizing and the text. Take a look at the preview. It's a little bit too large, but if you want it to kind of fill the entire card, you can definitely do that, or you can just drop it down, something like that, right? And experiment with the weights, semi-bold maybe. That's not too bad. Maybe a little bit larger, maybe 24. That looks pretty good, right? Now, down below, I'm gonna drop this down, and this might be the area for the card holder name. So in this case, it might be Howard Pinsky, right? And I might want to drop this in size a little bit so it's not as large as the numbers. And this is an area where you might want to switch out the typeface a little bit. Now, of course, you know, you may also want it to be consistent and have the same typeface for the entire card. But I think for this one, I'm going to switch it over to Astoria Sands just because it is a bit smaller. And as you shrink down text, it becomes a little bit difficult to read sometimes when you're dealing with, display typefaces or serif typefaces, right? So I'll do something like this, and maybe I'll drop down the size a little bit more, and maybe it's medium. That's not too bad, right? And then on top of this, I might just want a very quick line of text that says something like maybe card holder. And I might want to drop this in size as well. Right? Something like that. That could do. Definitely, you know, as you're designing your own mobile wallets and cards, spend a little bit more time than I am to make things look even fancier. I'm also going to duplicate this over to the right-hand side. I'm going to align it to the right. And then I'm going to use this area for the expiration date. So that's not it, EXP, and then we'll just do something like 0924. There we go. And then finally, we might want some sort of a logo at the top. You can definitely use your own branding. I am going to hop over to my Creative Cloud libraries for a second and grab my Boop logo, shrink it on down, and we'll just use that for this particular card. There we go. Maybe I'll shift these over a little bit. And now we have our first card, looking pretty good. So at this point, what we might want to do is we might want to convert this into a component. So we can basically have one card as the source of truth, and then we can create instances of this card and then make changes to it. So that if we did decide to update the typeface for all the cards, we can very easily do it. Or if we wanted to update the branding or whatever it might be, that's very simple. So I'm going to go ahead and select all this information here. Inside of my properties inspector, inside of my properties inspector, we can go ahead and hit the plus button to create a component. I was looking at my layers, but saying properties inspector. I don't know why, but I'm gonna go ahead and press the plus button to create a component. I'm gonna call this card. And now we have our card. Now, of course, we can create additional states if we want to. We can create hover states or toggle states, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a few additional cards. So I'm gonna make sure to duplicate this downwards. And I'm going to dive in here, and just for some of these, we're going to change the color a little bit. So maybe we'll do, now of course, because we have white text on top of it, we want to make sure that we don't cause any accessibility issues. So something along these lines looks pretty decent. Maybe we'll do one more card down here. Right, something like, ooh, a blue looks kind of nice. And we can always, hop over to Finder or, grab another stock image and maybe replace this with waves or something. A little bit difficult to see, but there it is, right? So we can kind of have some fun with it. And what's great is because we're editing an instance of the main component, we can always go back here and then change, let's say, the typeface to something like Comic Sans, and it's going to push those changes, those amazing changes, to all the other instances, which is great, right? Comic Sans for life. All right, now, I did mention earlier that we have this interesting design up here that you can definitely learn how to do on YouTube, but very quickly, because I think we have a little bit of time before we get to the good stuff about 3D transforms. Let's add one more card. And what I'm going to do here is we don't need the texture that we have on top of here. So I'm going to delete that. But what I want to do is I want to create a mask, because we're going to have a bunch of different circles kind of overflowing so we can create that nice little gradient, right? So I'm going to duplicate this particular shape and then use this shape that I just duplicated as the mask. So I'm going to select both of these rectangles here, 148,000. Object, mask with shape, right? So now anything we put inside of this mask we're not going to have that overflow, right? It's all going to be contained inside of this area. So I'm going to grab let's say my ellipse tool. Maybe I'll make a nice large ellipse right about here. And I'll just start shifting. I'll add some colors. I'm not too concerned about the colors just yet, but we will maybe make some tweaks a little bit later on. Something like that. Maybe we'll shift it down to, that color might cause some problems. Make this a bit smaller. Maybe this one will be more of a purplish. And then we'll have one up here, maybe orange, right? So we have a bunch of colors, and when I click away, they're all contained inside of that mask, which right away, looks pretty good, right? You could definitely leave it at this, but we might want to blur these shapes a little bit. So I'm going to make sure to select all of them inside of this mask, and then over within the properties inspector to the right, we can change this down here at the bottom from a background blur to an object blur. And then I can increase the size of the blur so we have this nice looking gradient, right? With all these different colors. We have purple and pinks and oranges and blues, which looks pretty interesting, right? And I think that looks kind of cool. Now we can take this a little bit of a step further and we can experiment with blend modes. Now, if I were to, at this point, switch this over to color dodge, for example, it's not bad. We would definitely have to change the color of the text, but I might also want to change the color of the actual card in the background so it's a little bit darker, right? Somewhere in this range here. And now you're starting to see that because we changed the blend mode to color dodge, we have some interesting interactions going on. Now, some of them are a little bit too harsh, but as you move these around, they're kind of almost blending with each other in real time, right? So definitely experiment with the different blend modes, things like overlay or soft light. Some of them will definitely give you better results than others, and you might have to change the base color of the card. But you get the idea, right? But let's go ahead and go back to our regular colors right there, and that looks pretty good. And then we're going to do one more. Maybe I'll duplicate this down, and we'll just do a nice simple dark card maybe. Something like that. Maybe I'll add a bit of a border on the inside, and there we go. All right, so we have a bunch of our cards ready to go and ready for 3D transforms, right? So how are we going to do this? Well, the first thing we can do is we can start kind of pushing these cards around back or forwards in space. Now, when you launch an application experience like this, where it's, cards, you don't want them to be too overlapping because you want to be able to see them and very quickly get a glimpse of what the card is. So in the initial state, you might actually want them. You might want one card down here at the bottom, taking into consideration that there might be some sort of a potential navigation bar at the bottom, right? So you might want one here, oops, and then I'm going to select all these cards here and then just use the distribution options at the top to align, distribute vertically, right? Just so you can see all the cards at once, right? But however, what you might want to do is when one of the cards is tapped on, you might want the other ones to kind of collapse and maybe have this fly out effect, right? And one of them will come into focus. So what we're gonna do is we're going to duplicate this artboard to the right, Command and Control D, just like that. And let's say we're gonna tap on this card right here at the bottom. So I'm gonna start by moving this card up just to kind of get it out of the way. And these cards down here, I'm gonna move down and we're gonna start kind of pushing them back. So I'm going to click on this first card, and what we want to do now is want to activate 3D transforms. And you can do that over to the right within the Properties Inspector, which is this icon right over here, or the Command and Control T shortcut. And you can just start kind of pushing these cards back a little bit, right? Just like that. And you can also start overlapping them and pushing this down. And now we have this nice little stack that's kind of hidden down here at the bottom. And you can go in many different directions, right? So you can go also, maybe you want something like this instead of, so it's on top instead of the bottom, right? Something like that. That could work as well. But you can take this even further. And you can also, shift the actual perspective of these cards. So what I'm going to do is there are two ways to do this. We can either, group these cards together and then rotate like this. And look at that. That looks pretty interesting. Or you can not group them together and then rotate them like that as well. Now they do give a little bit of a different feel, right? When they were grouped, they looked a little bit more spread apart. So definitely depends on what you're looking for. But I think, grouping them like this looks pretty interesting. And I can just kind of have these cards sitting towards the bottom here, while this card is the main card right at the top. And there might be more information over here, right? Now, one thing I'll point out is down here at the bottom, I did group these cards. Now, if I was concerned about animating between the different artboards, let's actually get rid of this for a second. I would want to make sure that that group is the same on the other artboards. So I'm going to make sure to, actually I'll group this one. I already grouped it, but I'm going to name this, let's say cards. And I'm going to go on this artboard here and make sure to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to group these and call these cards, right? So what I'm going to do now is we want to make sure to wire this up so that when this card down here at the bottom is tapped on, we can very easily transition to the second artboard. So under prototype mode, we're going to make sure to select that card right down at the bottom, and we're going to drag the blue handle over to this second artboard. And this will allow us to customize this interaction within the Properties Inspector. So in this case, we do want a tap. We could potentially also do drag. We'll try that out in a second. But we do want to make sure that everything animates beautifully. So we're going to switch it over to auto animate, And in terms of the easing options, we can try something like ease in out, which will be a bit slower at the beginning, a bit slower at the end, and then we'll try duration somewhere around 0.4 seconds. And with that done, we're going to press play, and now there is our animation, right? So you saw that that card at the bottom kind of flew up to the top, and the other cards kind of collapse into this lovely 3D space. And we can do that backwards as well. So we can click on this card, drag it back over, and we can continue the cycle just like that, right? And that looks pretty fancy. Now, of course, we can add additional features to it. We can also add that drag trigger like I was talking about. So back within prototype mode, we can drag this over to this artboard. And we did default to drag because we already have a tap trigger on there. So if I press play, I can now just drag this card up, and you're noticing that everything is animating as you would expect, which is really cool, right? All right, so one other thing you might want to do is, when you tap on a card, you might want to reveal additional information, whether it's transactions or whatever it might be, right? And that's going to kind of dictate where these cards are shown. Are they shown at all? You might go into a different screen, right? So some of this stuff may not even be necessary. But what you might want to do is you might want to actually, let me show you another kind of fun trick we might want to do. Maybe flip the card around, right? And wasn't planning on this, but I just remembered that you can do that. Let's try that. All right, so in here, what we're going to do is we have this component, right? And what I want to do is I want to create the back of this card. So I'm actually going to, let's copy these elements here. I'm going to paste it. And we're going to, let's grab the rectangle. We're going to draw out a box for the signature, right? And then you might have down here at the bottom, there might be, that line of text for other things. But for now, I'll just put another box down here. Maybe I'll drop the opacity, right? Of course, you can put pretty much anything you want down at the bottom. So this essentially will be the back of the card. So I'm going to name this back, right? And then we have our front. Now, what we want to do, we want to essentially flip the back over, and then we want to group everything together. So we want this backing to be kind of flipped. Let me actually put something on here just so we can see what we're dealing with, right? So I'll type it signature, and I'll change the color. Oh, look, Comic Sans, perfect. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to activate 3D transforms one more time, and we want to flip it 180 degrees on this axis right over here, right? So we're going to go ahead and do 180. So now it's backwards, but we also want it to be behind the card. And it's not as simple as just moving it behind the card in the layer stack, right? We actually wanted to push it backwards in space a little bit. So the Z-axis, which allows us to go forward and backwards in space, we're going to go -1 for the back. And then for the card, we can bump that up to 1 just to give it a little bit of breathing room. It's a very minuscule amount of space, but it definitely does help. And with both of those in place, we want to make sure to place them both into a group. So I'm going to go ahead and select them, group it, and I'll call this card, right? So now that we have that done, we have our front and we have our back inside of one group. And then we also have that back, which is flipped 180 degrees, right? It's a little bit confusing at first, but once you start to get the hang of it, it makes a little bit of sense. Now, what we want to do is we're going to duplicate this artboard one more time. And now we want to be able to reveal the back of that card. So there's a few things we want to do. Number one, we want to make sure to flip the entire group. So 180 degrees on the Y, right? And then we want to reverse the front and the back. So we're going to grab the front and set the Z to -1. And then the back, even though it's revealed right now, we're just going to bump it to 1. Just like that, right? So at this point, what we want to be able to tap on this card here, and then it's going to reverse to this screen here, or it's going to, flip the card over. You can also possibly, down here at the bottom, maybe this will be the front of the card. You can have a little bit of a sort of like a call to action down here, and this will be the back. These are terrible, absolutely terrible icons, right? Right? So now in prototype mode, you can grab this button right here, or icon, or whatever it ends up being over there, and then auto animate will keep ease in and out, and duration of 0.4 seconds, and let's see what happens. Ooh, look at that, right? And we can just reverse the process. Copy, paste, This will be 100%. This will be 50%. And then we'll use this to go back to this screen here, right? So one more time, we can click, flips the card over, and we can click again, and it flips it back, right? And of course, you can combine that interaction with the other interactions from the previous screen. You can go crazy with this. There's so much you can potentially do. I kind of shoved a lot of information into all of your faces at once, but go back, digest some of this stuff, think about what you can do with an experience like this, and have fun with it. That's the most important thing. Have some fun with it, get creative, and knock yourself out. Definitely share your work on Behance and on Dribbble and on Discord, all the different places. Tweet it at us, and I'm gonna be back tomorrow with not just my masterclass, but also day number 5 of our creative challenge. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all next time.